Welcome back to the Masters of Materium. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're basically going to react or have a post-mortem on the last Mirandus playtest. We're going to share what we learned, what we liked, what we didn't like, and what we'd love to see moving forward. Here's what we learned. First, we learned about the basic crafting recipes. Ilham, what was your thoughts on those?
So I thought the crafting recipes were quite appropriate in terms of the play test and how they flowed together and general gameplay, kind of the progression that brought you from one set of crafting item to the next. Everything kind of flowed very well. With that said, as you can expect, given that it was only a play test and the vast majority of buildings and the like were not available, it was very basic. So, the final game is likely going to be, far more complex than that. But I think they did a really good job on the playtest for what it was in terms of crafting.
Yeah, I agree. What about you, Grill?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I thought the crafting was maybe a little basic, but it also had good progression. There was some items I don't think I ever crafted, like some of the mid-tier items. Usually it was just like club into hammer. By the end, we were skipping a lot of the leather gear and going directly in the brig. It would have been nice to see if the progression was a little more important, where you couldn't jump around. But I guess that's kind of natural to just get as efficient as possible with these type of games as you learn a little bit more about them.
Yeah, they didn't force the progression, right? That was probably a little bit of a miss on their part where we could just skip over kind of that mid-tier stuff. The second main big thing we learned is really about creature behaviors, right? Kiting, running away, aggro patterns. Alan, what was your thoughts on just the overall creature behaviors from their defensive elements and the attacks?
So they changed the actual pathing and aggro during the playtest. Like initially, the way it worked is that it was proximity based aggro only. So whoever was closest to the mob, that was who the mob was attacking. Whether you ever attacked the mob or if you interfered in any way, they attacked whoever was closest. Now, they changed that after a while because people were cheesing getting the goblin kills and gathering onyx and such. So what ended up happening is they randomized the pathing such that if a mob came within a certain distance of you, it had a random chance of attacking anyone else within that various distance, which means that you could not be attacking a mob or being close to a mob and suddenly a mob would run past a bunch of people and attack you seemingly for no reason. That made things a lot more complex. It also made it much more difficult to tank mobs. And honestly, I think some combination thereof would have been good, like proximity or an actual threat table being important, and then maybe add in a bit of a randomized element. But not having any direct tanking whatsoever made things a little more complex than I think it would have needed to be.
Grill, what was your thoughts on creature behaviors?
Yeah, it definitely made things a little complex. It made things a little random and a little messy at times as well. I learned a lot about kiting, that is for sure. I think we did more kiting in 2 weeks of that playtest than I did in 15 years in WoW. I think for the most part that the creatures overall behaved better than I thought they were. From the first video that they showed the playtest, things looked a little kind of clunky. I thought it was a little smooth. I thought the aggro radius was maybe a bit too large, but with how hard they wanted the playtest to be, in that case, maybe it was actually appropriate.
Next, we learned that hashtag make Mirandus hard is real. I personally hope they keep it tuned this hard. I think that, of course, having different zones with different difficulty levels would be great. Maybe not every zone needs to be that hard, but Ilham, what was your thoughts on just the overall difficulty level?
So initially, without knowing everything, it was very, very difficult at the start. And you notice that people were dying quite easily and people were, following the progression chain exactly one step at a time. Later on, as we got, we knew kind of the cheese spots, we started having people that were geared that could help gear up other people. then you could start doing, as Grill was saying, kind of skipping leather and then going straight to the Brigadine armor. Eventually it got to the point where we would just simply get a group. They would bring us to the iron to craft a hammer and pick the carbon and then go right to champion swords. And that saved a lot of time. When they changed the aggro to the randomized aggro, that became a little more difficult, but I think the difficulty was pretty much on par, and the test definitely got considerably more difficult as the play test progressed. Like the dev team constantly changed things to make things harder, and not just including Mother, but pretty much every aspect of the game. The mobs, their aggro, the locations to fight them, their spawn rates, you name it, the difficulty increased dramatically from the start to the end of the playtest.
What's your opinion, Grill?
Yeah, I mean, initially, if you were in Brig Armor, you were pretty much immune to goblins and wolves, and then later on, you could actually take some damage. It means you couldn't tank a whole group of them, especially when it was still proximity-based aggro. Yeah, no, the test was quite hard. Especially, there seemed to be a couple of spots when you would get a little more confident, maybe you had your champion sword and champ bow and your Brig gloves, and then you were trying to farm that last bit of onyx and wolf leather for that Brig armor, heading out to some of the more dangerous areas. And I think that's probably the part of the game where I died the most often, outside of actual Mother.
We learned that it will be close to impossible to succeed alone, which, of course, I think we're not that surprised by that. But, and were you surprised at all at how much team play was crucial for success?
So when it came to, say, fighting Mother, I fully expected, that was going to require a full and or large group. When it came to doing basic things, especially early on, I was a little surprised how difficult it was to fight the mobs. And more importantly, even if you could do things solo, being in a group was just so much safer. So let's say someone with a club, they could beat a goblin. The goblin was all alone, but if you happened to have an ad attack you, or there was another spawn, or someone ran some mobs into you, or anything like that, if you were solo just trying to gear up, you're heading back to the beach very quickly. So yeah, the amount of grouping and the necessity of grouping was more than I expected, although I went in with the expectation that grouping would be a significant factor in this playtest.
What about you, Grill?
The very beginning, like Ann was saying, was you could kill one goblin with a club and have 10% health left, and anything else happened on the goblin aggro, like you say, somebody ran by, you're heading straight to the graveyard. I think that the difficulty early on was, like, I agree with Alan, that it was just a little bit harder than expected, and it was also just being grouped was much more efficient in general.
Grill, what's your opinion on the level of team effort required to succeed? Were you happy with it, or do you feel like they should tune that?
I love group play in these type of games, so I was pretty happy with it. I think it might make it difficult for somebody just trying to come into the game initially. Then again, I don't expect it to be quite this hard at launch either, but it seemed borderline suicidal to head out on your own in this playtest.
Yeah, and it's up to the game designers to create the game in a way that creates the right dynamics. For an example, team play is necessary, and I think that's what they want, and I think the overall direction they're going in is the right direction. Let's talk about combat. So we learned the basics of combat. I thought it was good. I'll save kind of my critiques for the next sections, but Ellen, what was your overall thoughts on combat?
So the combat was fairly basic, of course, because there wasn't any magic. There were no specific skills. Like, you could press a different button that did more damage, but there was no actual skills. There was no dodging. There was no blocking, parrying. You could kite things. You could also use the bow, but in general, the bow was only really good for pulling mobs. It did very little DPS in the actual game. So it was essentially, once you got in range of a mob, it was pretty much just hack and slash until they're dead, which was surprisingly enjoyable given how basic it was. The interesting things about combat and kind of group dynamics in combat, being first person, and the fact that you couldn't actually see people's like names over their heads or anything of that nature, added a significant immersion and difficulty element that you probably wouldn't have gotten if it was following more traditional designs from MMORPG. So no, I actually really like the combat in general. The rating specifically was really enjoyable. The PvP, or in quotes PvP, element of random people interfering with your mobs, your aggro, your looting, and other mobs also added another significant layer of complexity and difficulty, and kind of that was honestly the most entertaining part of the test, despite me not really liking that much.
I will say too, as you just mentioned, being that it's first person, a lot of times, like I was just discombobulated. I was getting attacked from behind, and then I turn around, there was another wolf on me, and didn't really know what was going on. And it would take a few seconds compared to if it was third person, you'd easily understand what was going on. So I actually enjoyed that, even though it was more challenging. But Grill, what was your overall thoughts on combat?
Uh, as somebody who's been running and organizing raids for a long time now, the chaotic atmosphere that having other people from other guilds come into your raids did not make me overall too happy. Definitely made things a kind of a unique challenge to do. I do agree with the first person thing. Definitely very immersive. The no nameplates or bars or UI or crazy add-ons or anything like that you would have in, say, World of Warcraft. Gave the game a nice clean look, kind of made the combat feel more real. I would have liked to seen some additional animations for the alternate attacks. Everything was the same animation. To the point early on, I was like, well, I don't know if these are even doing anything differently damage-wise. And like you said, getting attacked from behind, that happened all the time. Whereas in a third-person game, as you said again, you would see it running up to you and never even get hit.
So the next 3 points are all related. So let me start with the main one, then we'll get into the other two. And we learned that stamina is absolutely one of the most important resources to manage. And obviously related to that is, how critical food's going to be, and also returning back to deeds is also going to be incredibly important. So what's your opinion of that, Alan? Do you think, managing stamina was one of the most, obviously one of the most critical things? And did you like that? Do you think that was a powerful or good decision on the devs' part?
It was definitely interesting. It certainly made you plan things in advance. So you would kind of have to balance, should I sprint right now versus risk getting low on health? Should I fight this mob off, or should I run at this case? Should I use my more powerful attacks now, which use stamina, even though I'm low on stamina? So you'd kind of always have to balance all that. More importantly, there was no stamina recovery out in the field. So there was no potions, there was no stamina recovery magic, there was no food or equivalent of the heal tent. So stamina, honestly, I would say is your most valuable resource, simply because if you ran out of it, not alone could you not sprint and not use any special attacks, but you would take a ticking damage over time, which essentially, if you're any significant distance away from the citadel, meant that you were dead, and with permadeath meant that you were starting over. So it was a very interesting concept. Obviously, the final game, stamina is not going to be as crucial as it was in the playtest, but a very interesting mechanic at the very least.
Grill?
Yeah, I think with the way they set it up, your choices when you were outside of the Citadel or not near a heal tent, really mattered. Do you have enough stam to make it back to a heal tent or to take on a few more mobs? Same thing with your health, right? If you were a little low in health and there was a lot of stuff in between you and the next place you could heal, you had to make a decision whether it was to tuck tail and run back to some place that's a little bit easier or try to push. Often pushing led to to death. That's why I was saying earlier you could easily die at some of those more difficult spots that are a little deeper into the area. I would have liked to have seen a little bit of maybe some rations you could take with you, but in an area that small and in a playtest where they really wanted to tune the difficulty to the max, I could see why they didn't do it. And like I said, I did enjoy the importance and level of decision making you had to make on the fly at all times, trying to balance your health and stamina.
Do you guys think that when the real game launches, the rations that you could bring on the road will only give you like minor amounts of stamina? In other words, you're going to have to go to a tavern and eat the hot meal to get maxed out. I think that's what they're going to do. But Alan, what's your opinion?
So the way that it worked in the playtest, the bread that you ate gave you 5% of your stamina bar. And I don't see any reason why you couldn't take a ton of bread with you to last longer. The downside of that is already built in, given the fact that it's probably not very efficient to craft from a material standpoint. And also, you have to worry about encumbrance and inventory space when you're outside as well. So if you take a ton of traveling rations, that means you can't bring back as much loot. It means you can't carry as much arrows, probably can't carry as much weapons or wood or ore or whatever. So I think they could leave it kind of in the same design as the playtest, as the system would probably balance itself out. Now, they might have to tune the amount that you get and how difficult it is to make compared to other things. Like in the playtest, I never crafted a single trencher the entire time. Even though in the actual game, when materials are not unlimited, I'd suspect I'd be focusing most of my stamina regeneration on something such as a trencher.
Yeah, so the limit might be the weight and just the space limitations, right? So what's your opinion, Grill? Do you think that when the game launches, I really think they want to force players to go back to deeds. So they certainly did that during this playtest, but how do you think they're going to do that during the real game?
I agree. I think going back to deeds is the name of the game come release. They could also make it so, let's say you eat a piece of bread and it gives you 5% of your stamina. Well, they can make it so that 5% is not permanent and it degens over time on top of you using it. And this way it's not like a permanent stamina increase. That's another way they can punish people in the field and force people to go back. They could also, maybe you can only carry a certain amount. Maybe they put like a limit on how much you can carry as well. There's a few different ways. I also think that weight and actual space, if it's anything like other games I've played, which is usually very limited, it may not be beneficial to take 100 loaves of bread into the field with you.
We learned a lot of the core enemy stats, including hit points, critical hits, and that some can regen. Alan, what was your thoughts on just the enemy attributes and stats? Do you feel like there should be more things added? Were you happy with it?
I was fairly happy with what we did have. It was, again, fairly basic. Critical hits were all of the same magnitude. There was no, blocks or parries or anything of that nature, as previously mentioned. In terms of the actual stats themselves, there was not really any strength stat or intelligence or any of that. And we also didn't have the mastery system in place. So those kind of things, when actually put into the game, obviously are going to have significant effects. That and, stats that you would potentially get from Vox other than the % hit point increase and any exemplar bonuses or other buffs and such. So from the playtest perspective, I was satisfied with what they did from a stat perspective. Come actual launch, it needs to be far, far more complex.
Grill, on the creature stat side, anything else you feel they should add or tweak a little bit?
Oh, they could definitely add some debuffs, right? There's nothing like no armor piercing or poison or degen, or there was one mob that regen, right? There was no mechanics besides just attack, crit, and damage, and a few defensive mechanics. I don't know if I don't think the mobs had any kind of defense. I think it was just your weapon versus their weapon damage versus their health. So for the playtest, for a first real playtest where it felt like a game, I agree it was pretty satisfactory. But in terms of what it needs to be for release, there's quite a bit more to go.
We certainly learned that there will be deaths. So, the team released the stats, which we'll go over some of them in a second. But on average, there was one death per minute, which would equal, 525,600 deaths a year if it just stayed at that clip. What's your opinion, ALM, on Are you more bullish on cemeteries? That's my question, because obviously you've been relatively bearish on those, considering how many deaths happen. And of course, it might not be as bad when the real game launches, but do you think that deaths are going to be as prevalent when the game launches, or do you expect some major shifts?
So I can see. So I'm not more bullish on cemeteries. First off, probably less so actually. But the reason behind it is when we started the playtest, people were dying much earlier and more often. By the end of it, I could consistently get to max gear in a much shorter period of time with a much lower probability of death. Now, did I die a lot of times? Sure. To Mother, she was one-hitting people, so that was a guaranteed death. It likely won't be that come release. The other thing is the vast majority of my deaths were with on-geared characters and or kiters. And come actual launch, I'm not sure how important an on-geared character would be. Like, I probably died 200 or 300 times between my various exemplars with on-geared characters versus probably dying maybe like 10 times total with partially or fully geared characters that were not facing Mother. With regards to cemeteries as well, the other thing you have to remember is that there was permadeath in this particular match. So when there's permadeath, people play very different, right? Especially in certain cases.
What about you, Grill? Are you more bullish or bearish after the playtest on cemeteries and deaths?
Nah, overall, I think I'm actually less bullish, more bearish on him. People are going to try to avoid death, especially if it costs them money in general. I also think that the regular game will be easier than this. The actual release will be a little easier. How much easier, I'm not sure. Also, our experience, I didn't die that many times, just like Alem, on an actual gear character outside of Mother. There was a couple times I died gearing up. But also our level of experience is quite a bit higher than the average player. So I imagine the average player would die more than us. But overall, if death is something that's easy to come by, people will probably do their best to avoid it, in my opinion.
I think one of the most significant things that I wouldn't say we learned, but that I believe is this game is going to be an absolute smash hit. And just to go over some of the stats, I mean, there was 18,000 plus exemplars that played, 121 plus thousand individual sessions. I think that it might have been the highest daily active user count they've ever had in a game at Gala. Maybe Ilum, what that would be, but I think once the game launches with the real economy, this was just a play test, right? I mean, imagine when the game launches, imagine when the marketing's out, imagine when all the other features are in, and just based on how excited people were during the play tests, and a lot of people were like barely sleeping, and people were just grinding, and also how people felt after the play test was over, which is, I need more, I want more. Ilum, where are you at? Are you more bullish or less after the playtest?
So on the game in general, far more bullish. I was very, very impressed with the playtest. I was expecting it to be a significant improvement over previous tests, but I didn't know just how addictive the playtest was. Like, I expected that I'd want to be logging in quite regularly so I could grind through all my exemplars and goblin kills and the like. But even if I wasn't actually getting Materium, I would probably continue to do that the entire test without any reward. And coming from me, that's saying a lot, because financial reasons is my number one reason by a long shot. So the fact that I was actually enjoying it from a non-financial perspective to the extent that I did, that says a lot.
Yeah, no, I think this game has all the potential in the world, especially with some of the other stuff they've talked about, besides what was in the playtest, puzzles and all that kind of thing. This is a game I would play, even if it was a Web 2 game. This is something I would play a lot of, even if it was just a slightly more complex version of what we saw in the playtest. I think at full release, this is going to really wow people and really put Web 3 gaming kind of on the map. I see big potential here. Much more bullish after the playtest for sure.
Ilum, anything else you want to add to kind of what we've learned?
Well, one thing that did kind of throw me off, which I expected to some extent, but just not nearly to the level that we saw it, was the degree that the devs monitored our progress and adjusted accordingly. So, several examples I can give. So, one, when we first fought Mother, they increased her damage right off the bat. The next thing is we were having our raids interfered with, so we then logged out a bunch of exemplars at the back of the cave, so we could fight her without having to worry about ads and all that. Before we could take advantage of it, they added 3 mega brutes to spawn right next to her as well. So that happened. Also, every time we found new spots that we could kind of cheese mobs, they got rid of those. We found ways to kind of cheese the aggro. They took advantage of that. We, at the very, very end, we found a way to completely remove all the mobs from Mother's cave to bug them all out so we could just fight Mother continuously without any respawns. And the server mysteriously reset after we did that. So they were monitoring progress and reacting accordingly to an extent that far exceeded what I was expecting.
Grill, what was your reactions to that while it was happening?
Yeah, I did not expect them to adjust as much. It almost kind of felt like we were shaping the game a bit, but it was a fun little kind of cat and mouse game to see. They were seeing what we were doing. They were making adjustments, and we would devise new strategies and new ways of handling what they changed.
Which I think is great, you know what I mean? Because I think ultimately tuning this game to the right level of difficulty and doing all of these micro tunings throughout the game is really going to make a massive impact on the quality of the gaming experience. So I was personally loving the fact that we're doing that. And then obviously when the real game launches, they'll probably continue doing that on every level. And if you think about how complex this is going to be, I mean, there's going to be hundreds of different little things they can tune, right? Every single resource, how much can you pull out? Like, every creature can be tuned. Like, it's just, there's so much tuning that's going to be, I think, a critical phase in making this game all it can be. So what about you, Grill? Anything else you felt like we learned?
I think we covered quite a bit of it. Like you were saying, they can adjust every timer, every spawn, every mob, crafting time, materials.
So well, the next section, like what we liked. So first of all, I love the fact that it was tune hard and forced team play. We kind of covered that. I did love the crafting stations. I thought they were well built. And I love the graphics of the buildings and the plants. How did you guys feel about just let's get into graphics a little bit. Again, let's start with the stuff we liked. Alan, what did you like graphically in the world?
So I like the general aesthetic of the world for sure. It has kind of a mixture of kind of like a Breath of the Wild and World of Warcraft kind of look. And those kind of aesthetics tend to age really well. And it also, it looked really good given the kind of the game itself. So it felt right in the area. Another thing, and honestly, the thing that I enjoyed most about the playtest was how good the guild interactions were. This was the first time, as the Masters of Materium, that we actually had to play as the guild. And I was very impressed by the amount of engagement that the guild members had and how much everyone was wanting to help everyone with doing various tasks and stuff. And honestly, I think that was the best part of the playtest.
Gro, what was your thoughts on the graphics? Like, what did you like?
Like I think I said back to Malta originals, like we look at the kind of the style change they made back then, and I was like, it almost looks like a painting, which it still doesn't. I really, really like. And with follow what Alan said, this is the first time in a really long time where playing as a guild kind of felt like it did when I first started WoW, where everyone's just kind of learning and really, really working together to help each other out. I want to give a big shout out to Bic Bic for being our official guild alarm clock. Made sure we didn't die out in the open. But yeah, no, the working with people for the first time, competing against other guilds was really fun. I like that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff that really gets me going in MMOs. It's teamwork and the kind of the competitive nature of guilds going for first kills or first whatever.
Yeah, let's get into that. Well, first of all, I think, of course, if anybody wants to join the best guild in Mirandus, mastersofmaterium.com, hit the link, join the Discord, and register as a member. We're wide open for everyone. But yeah, I think the most thrilling part was how intense it got in terms of guild versus guild. It was pretty. I heard some people call it spicy. I heard some people say it was a little too spicy for them, but it got incredibly intense. And I actually wrote Jason Hughes, the Miranda's dev, and we're chatting a little bit. I mean, I think when the real game comes out with a real economy, it's going to be 5, 10 times more intense. I think it's going to be, I mean, just that alone adds like this whole other dimension to the game, right? I mean, there's the game and then there's the essentially PvP, right? I mean, it's not direct PvP, but it is. You are competing for resources, or you're competing for kills, or you're competing for different economic gains. And it's definitely intense. It was real. So yeah, Ilham, do you think when the game launches, it's going to go to the next level?
Oh, I expect the subterfuge, the politics, the backstabbing, the planning, every aspect that you can think of being turned up to 11 come actual launch. Like, we had to make a lot of adjustments between our Discord and who we could talk to, and we even went to the point of setting fake raid times, and there was a lot involved to try to make things run as smoothly as possible. And I think that's a sliver of kind of things to come.
Grill, do you think it's going to go to the next dimension?
Oh, I think it's going to go to dimensions we can't even imagine right now. Espionage and backstabbing, and yeah, the level of just trying to secure information. Let's say we find the Minotaur King. Well, how do we make sure everyone else in the whole server doesn't find out about that, and then and when they do find out, how are they going to try to thwart our plans to defeat it first? So yeah, I think it's going to be a level that is going to almost unimaginable. It's going to be pretty intense.
Speaking of bosses like the Minotaur King, I did like that, Mother was challenging. Ilham, what was your thoughts? Did you feel it was hard enough, too easy, just right?
So Mother wasn't a difficult encounter from like World of Warcraft perspective. Most bosses tend to be difficult because they're mechanically difficult. So Mother was a very, very basic mechanical fight. The main thing that made Mother difficult is the fact that you needed quite a lot of people because she did so much damage. That and the fact that she had a full cave of mobs that had much higher health than her and did quite a bit of damage, and they were on fast respawns. So that's really what made the Mother encounter difficult. I think it was a good encounter given what we had available to us. I do hope in the future we do see some bosses that you can actually develop some strategy of the actual combat itself, instead of just getting enough people and essentially zerging her down. Like, I was hoping that we were going to actually be able to do some tanking and maybe some ranged melee combat, maybe tank swaps, all that kind of stuff. But I'm sure we'll see things like that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, the boss Mother kind of just came down to a big math equation. Like, you had X damage and X people, and she attacks so often and one-shots this many people. It's just, if you had enough people in the right gear, you could take her down without too much hassle. Would definitely like to see some more mechanics. I don't expect things to be like WoW raids, but I'd like to see, either mob spawns or actual mechanics that people have to react to. I think they can go a long way yet with that. But, like Ilham said, with what we had available in the playtest, I thought it was pretty good. And they kept making it harder too, which was nice. Every time we went to go kill her, it was kind of a new challenge and how we were going to overcome that.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I hope that there's challenges in the real game that just sheer numbers can't overcome. It's going to require skill and strategy far beyond just throwing 100 players at it. So I think one thing that's absolutely world-class is the sound design. And obviously they've chosen not to have music, which I think is a great decision. Also helps with immersion. Ilham, what was your thoughts on just the sound design in the world?
Yeah, I completely agree. The sound design added really good immersion to it. In some cases, especially early on before I knew where the map was, listening to the things like the sound of the waterfalls and the sound of mobs off in the distance and that sort of thing. It kind of directed me and guided me as to where I could go and things of that general nature. Just kind of the feel of it, hearing, the kind of like crickets and gathering, and even the firing of your weapons and everything else, hearing someone coming up behind you attacking a mob, that sort of thing. I did have a couple of people that said they were playing the game with no sound on, and I was like, well, how are you playing? Like, how do you know people aren't getting attacked behind you or anything of that nature? Or goblins, before you could see them, in a lot of cases you could hear them talking, and that was something they would do before they would run to you. So the fact that you had all this sound available was another layer of actual playing. Now, of course, the game will have some music via long songs, but yeah, there won't be any background music to the game, and I think that's a really good game decision on behalf of the Mirandus dev team.
One thing that was powerful was when you heard a player die. They made that sound, and it was interesting because everybody would react, right? Like, oh shit, somebody just died, because death is significant. And yeah, it was interesting. What about you, Grill? Are you fluent in Goblin yet?
I've been practicing. I have Rosetta Stone, and I've been doing a couple hours every day. But
Nice.
I'm not doing too well. No, I think the quality of the sounds, the way they did the sounds, everything about the sound was great. People playing without sound are severely gimping themselves. I think I said as much on Discord while we were playing. It's like, if anyone's playing without sound right now, you are putting yourself way, way behind. That would save you and help you and allow you to do things that you just couldn't do without it.
Yeah, in certain games like Call of Duty, sound gives you so much information that players will use all kinds of tricks to try to maximize the quality of the sound so they can get as much intel as possible. So let's talk about maybe one of the best features, and that is lighting. I'll start with you, Grill, because I know you've been a big fan. What was your overall thoughts on the lighting they're using in the world of Mirandus?
If you had a lantern, it was amazing. If you didn't have one, it was really, really dark. Lighting was good. I still feel like the second playtest overall has had the best lighting, but maybe just because there just wasn't that much and it was all new. Maybe I'm a little nostalgic about it. But the lighting in this game is really impressive. They've done a fantastic job just with the sound. All the little details on the things that they have put into the playtest, I thought were really well thought out and really well done. Yeah, so really impressed with that. Really impressed with the sound.
What about you, Elam?
Yeah, so a few things that have changed from previous playtests. First off, the lantern had a much larger illumination distance. Like, it seemed like it almost had an essentially endless illumination distance. Like, I remember coming out of the Citadel and seeing people's lanterns shining from near the Goblin camp or inside of the Wolf Den even, which is quite a significant distance. The other thing is it wasn't nearly as dark this time. So in the Goblin Meadows playtest, at the darkest part of night, so not when the moon was out, but at the actual deepest nights, the only thing you could see other than the campfires was the goblins' eyes. And it wasn't like this in this playtest. Now, I did have a different monitor since that last playtest, but in this one, even at the darkest part of night, for me, it was almost like daytime. Like, there was never a point in time where I couldn't see clearly. Now, I know not everybody experienced that, but for me, nighttime really had no effect whatsoever on my gameplay.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be interesting to see where they settle on just how dark night is and all these different decisions. All right, let's move on to the next section, which is what we didn't like. And I'm going to start with creature animations and movements. So, first of all, I thought the goblins and mother specifically looked awesome. But for example, I thought the wolves looked rough, and just the movement of the animals wasn't great. Elam, thoughts?
Yeah, for me, I'm playing at really high ping, like 250 milliseconds or higher typically. So I don't think everyone experienced this, but for me, the vast majority of the time, mobs were not moving anything other than across distances. So I didn't really very often see any movement of their bodies or change in direction. They were kind of like a freeze frame moving across the land. And I know that's not the way it was for most people, so that part I didn't particularly like. With that said, when they were moving, some of the movements were pretty janky, and the biggest one was the wolf for sure, which I think needs to be better animated. The goblin brutes were a little bit kind of stiff and slow looking with their animations, although it did make their club movements kind of look, strong. Mother didn't have a lot of animations, but her, her kind of her slap or her movement of her hand, it looked pretty powerful. And the fact that every time she swung her hand, it pretty much ended in a death, kind of it was consistent with that. The deer and stuff were okay. I kind of liked how they were bucking and such, and overall, I didn't really mind it too much. There's certainly a lot of room for improvement. I would like to see some larger monsters. It's like maybe some trolls like they had in Playtest 3, and really see how they move and interact with players as well.
What about you, Grill?
Yeah, I mean, if you've played Valheim, you see that sometimes, especially when you start running circles around mobs, they can move a little janky, and that game was considerably more smoother than the Mirandus playtest was. I don't know if that's just a limitation of the Unity engine or something that could be, fleshed out a little better. Wolves for sure. Sometimes they would just glide. They would just glide across the field and then bite you. There was also, it seemed like sometimes things would attack you to be a little further away than it seemed like it made sense. Also, if the attack animation went off, it didn't make a difference how far you went, you still got hit. So there's definitely some room for improvement there for sure.
The good news is McCarthy said I think they're gonna start from scratch on a lot of those. So I think McCarthy feels the same way we do in general on those. Next, and maybe just a personal thing, but I really, really don't like the exemplar facial designs. They look like creepy dolls carved out of wood. I think the bodies are fine, but I feel like the faces. If you look at some of the concept art, like the more recent concept art on the exemplars, I feel they should shoot for that. Did that bother you guys at all, Elam, Grill?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, especially the humans' eyes. They look like they're demonically possessed, or had exophthalmos or something of that
Looks
general
like they're hitting a
nature. So,
rock.
they're on something for sure.
Let's talk about defense. I feel like armor and all these defensive elements should be a percentage, not an absolute. Meaning that, if, for example, you have, let's say, the weakest armor, it might reduce the damage by 5% versus the best armor maybe reduces the attack by 50%, instead of just kind of having absolute defense hit point reductions. What was your thoughts on that, Elam?
So the way that it had an absolute reduction, that was exactly the same way my very first MMORPG, The Forthcoming, worked. So I was kind of quite familiar with that general feel to the games. What it does, though, it makes it so it gets to the point, if you have an armor reduction level that's consistent with a mob's attack level, that mob basically becomes irrelevant. Like, it literally does nothing to you. If they did it as a percentage based, it would at least make it so that mob would be something that you could at least acknowledge, and would add a little bit more value to that. So I would prefer if things were potentially percentage based, and that's more consistent with later MMORPGs like WoW, for example, where you have armor and that armor amount changes with various levels, and the percent reduction based on the mob's level and stuff as well. So yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that was a little too basic at this point in time.
Yeah, I think having percentage-based damage reduction from armor also allows for better scaling, because unless the numbers get really, really crazy, it also could potentially create a bigger gap between the low-end gear and the high-end gear. So people with really good armor will, maybe they have 80% damage reduction, where somebody who can't make or afford top-tier armor, they might only have 15%. That's going to allow people to access much, much more difficult content. Like I said, you could do the same with flat numbers, but then the numbers are just going to have to get really, really crazy from both the attack numbers from the mobs, the mobs, and the armor numbers, so actual flat numbers of armor on the pieces themselves.
But I think Elam highlighted the main issue, which was, if you had Brigadine armor, I mean, a lot of the creatures just didn't affect you whatsoever. So it changes the gameplay significantly. I think that all creatures on some level should be some level of threat. And the only way to do that is to kind of use a percentage based system. Next is unlimited resources, which I think for the playtest was fine. Of course, we had unlimited arrows and unlimited resources of any kind that you could harvest. And I think they needed to do that for the playtest. But I am quite excited about when the real game launches and things become extremely limited, because it's going to change everything. I mean, it's going to change the gameplay massively, right? Like people will use arrows more strategically. Obviously, a lot of people were using arrows because of the safety element. And then with the resources, do you guys think that if you find, for an example, a pine tree in the real game, that you're just going to be able to loot it infinitely, or it's going to be capped and then respawn at a certain rate? So, Yellow, I'm going to start with you.
So I would definitely expect that you can't farm something infinitely, and that would apply to pretty much everything. Whether or not that means that you can farm that thing, say, 5 chops on the tree and then it goes down and then you have to wait for it to regrow in that same spot, or if that means that it respawns somewhere else. Either, I guess, would be acceptable. The main thing is kind of controlling the amount of resources to match the needs of the players, such that there needs to be some scarcity to things. If there's no scarcity, there's essentially no value to anything. So that definitely needs to be put in place. The only way that you could make it so that it's infinite but remain scarce is if those resources happen to be in very, very hard to get locations and you have significant encumbrance, which means that it's scarce simply due to the availability to access them or the availability to recover them. That's the only scenario where I can see them having an infinite evergreen resource working.
Grill, what's your opinion on how is archery going to change in the real game, let's say compared to the playtest, if players have to go and buy or craft arrows, for an example?
It'll definitely make it more expensive, and it'll definitely make you a little more careful with how you shoot. Also, the damage just didn't make it worth it as well. The other issue is that players block arrows. They include, and not only that, but they block melee shots too. So your positioning could be really important as well. I don't know. Archery felt very, very weak on this playtest for a lot of reasons. Don't know what they could do to improve it beyond letting arrows actually pass through players and maybe adding, some additional damage from having arrows equipped as well.
Next, let's talk about looting mechanisms. Ailin, what was your thoughts on looting in general? Obviously, it was almost like a PvP thing because you could get the last shot, and if you were faster, you would be able to loot the animals and creatures. What would you change, if anything, as far as looting goes?
So for someone with me playing with high ping, the looting system was not acceptable on any level. So the only way that I would ever be able to loot thing is under a few scenarios. Number one was that I was the only person to attack the mob, which meant that I was the only person able to loot them. That I, banged into somebody and pushed them off while they were trying to loot, so essentially interrupted their looting. Or that I got between them and the mob so that they couldn't actually select the mob to loot. But in a scenario where I went up to loot a mob and another person went up to loot the mob, and let's say I even started looting first, I lost every single time. And because of that, I didn't even bother to try looting Mother during the entire playtest because I knew there was a 0% chance I was ever going to get the crown. What they need to do, they need to add mob blocking or capping, where, if you attack a mob as a solo player or as a group, then you are the only person to loot that, or to have loot specific to each individual player, meaning that every single person who contributes can go up and try to loot that. Otherwise, it's simply who has the best ping gets all the loot, and or who's the closest to the mob. So that would mean that people at distance with casting spells or people shooting arrows as range, like all sights and such, essentially never get any loot because the melee people with the fast ping gather everything. So no, I very much dislike the loot system, to say the least.
Grill.
And I had the complete opposite experience because my ping was amazing. I was able to take any piece of loot that I wanted at all times. In fact, I think there was only one person in the whole guild that had better ping than me and could out loot me. That said, I think that system is absolutely terrible. I agree that it needs to be either first to tag or some kind of personal loot system. Personal loot seems to be kind of the way they've been going with a lot of these MMOs now, where everyone gets to tap it after, as long as they've done some damage. Maybe they can put some kind of damage threshold in where you can't have somebody sit back and you fight a boss and somebody random walks up and throws one arrow in there and they get the best drop off the boss. I don't think that works either. I think that's one of their biggest challenges. I made a post about this in Gal's Discord a little while back, and it generated quite a conversation about it. I think they really have to put a lot of thought and time into it, because if they don't get this right, it's going to kind of destroy everyone's experience playing.
Next is no trading. Obviously, if we could have been trading and exchanging things, it would have been a huge game changer, because every player was forced to basically go out there, loot, farm, which I think was good for the playtest. But the trading would have certainly created even a stronger guild atmosphere where, hey, you're missing this, let's go get you that. And there was a version of that which people would help each other kill and let the weaker player, the player that was lagging, loot the creatures so they could catch up with their gear. But Alan, what was your thoughts on that? And do you think, and again, there's going to be trading and then, obviously commerce when the real game launches, but did you feel that was missing in the playtest?
So a few things. So first, trading was available in a limited way. Like, for example, I gave Grill and Van both exemplars from, my wallet to theirs, which, gave them buffs within the game. And also I know people traded Lanterns of the Sun, Rings of Discord and stuff as well, just via the blockchain as opposed to in-game trading. With that said, actual person-to-person trading in-game was disabled. And if that were enabled, it would have completely trivialized the playtest. So you'd have people with full Brigadine armor and voltaic swords walking up to people that are just spawned on the beach, and within seconds, that person will be fully decked out. And farming stuff when you're fully decked out is much, much harder, or much, much easier, I should say, than starting from scratch and having to work your way up. So given the confines of the playtest, I think person-to-person trading would have been a really bad thing to do. With that said, come actual launch, it's it's a must-have in an MMORPG.
Yeah, no, I agree. If once you got geared up, farming additional gear was really, really quick and easy. And I actually think it would have reduced the amount of guild gameplay we would have had. We were forced to work together because we couldn't trade, and we had to, escort and funnel drops to people so they can get geared up as well. So within the confines of the playtest, I think the no trading was fine. Obviously, come release, there's going to have to be trading, or you're not going to really have a game.
Looting ore and iron felt too simple. I'm worried that in the game, is it just going to be button spamming for resource extraction, or will there be some sort of gameplay where it requires some level of focus or activity to actually extract those resources? And again, this is just my personal feeling, but Ellen, what's your opinion? Do you think when the game launches, it should just be hit F or there should be, some sort of focus required to extract something? Maybe you got to move your mouse around a certain way and kind of feel the wall, and then the cursor changes color and then you click, or do you think it should just be hit F?
I think that the gameplay should be complex enough and deep enough that if, say, someone wants to play a hollower mining, that they should want to actually play just as a hollower, that they can go into a mine and they have a full gameplay experience simply in the mining aspect itself, whether that's trying to find the resources, trying to optimize the use of the resources, specific mining skills to potentially get higher drops or affect their energy use while mining. There you can have like full, almost like, mining DPS type rotations and such. So there's a lot of games that have a lot more complexity than just press F. And I very much hope, given that the way that exemplars are made and designed, that each exemplar can essentially have their own full gameplay loop.
If I have to sit there and hit the F key to loot for the next 5 to 10 years, I think it's just my finger might just fall off. It was already sore by the end of the 2-week playtest. Yeah, no, I'm with Alum, where I was going to pretty much say the same thing, where I'd like to see these exemplars and classes have actual abilities that are based on, mining or farming or woodcutting or something of that nature. I mean, you look at FF14, when you select a profession, it comes with a full array of abilities with it too, not just, I'm better at making something.
All right, next thing that bothered me was that we had all of the stats for all the creatures, which, for example, made beating Mother just a pure mathematical equation instead of a challenging puzzle. Let's start with Grill, where obviously it helped us significantly, but from a pure gameplay perspective or gaming experience, were you a little bit disappointed that we had the stats? And in a perfect world, when the game launches, would you prefer all of the stats become a mystery?
Yeah, I think a mystery makes it a little more, I kind of like the adventure and the discovery process of these games. So it was definitely beneficial to have them for the playtest. I wouldn't want to have them upon release. That said, with the design of how things were, I mean, we would have figured it out pretty quickly anyway. Maybe not the exact numbers, but pretty much what we needed, since there was no actual mechanics to the fights.
Yeah, so if you compare it to, say, games like World of Warcraft, which has a dungeon guide or a raid guide that tells you exactly how many hit points and all the stats of the bosses and all their abilities and how to interact with them and such. This is kind of like almost par for the course, that all the details are given. With that said, I don't think that it should be like that come launch. Will there be data mining in the game? Sure. Now they'll have to ideally encrypt that so that people can't easily access. Being a kind of a numbers guy, I liked it, obviously, because focusing on numbers and being able to calculate every aspect of everything is kind of what I do. But in general, I would say it's probably better for the game if that kind of information remains a mystery for people to figure out.
Yeah, I think it just goes counter to the spirit of Mirandus, which is you guys got to go figure everything out. And as you mentioned, the challenge and the fun of going out there and fighting creatures without knowing what's going on and trying to do the math after the battle or after you died is an exciting gameplay element. And it just felt like that got stripped away. So, Ellen, anything else that you didn't like in the playtests?
The playtest itself, I didn't like how the Materium worked. I'll tell you that much.
Yes.
83
Agreed.
Materium per exemplar. Yeah, no. Like, other than how that affected the playtest, if you look on OpenSea right now, you'll see the exemplars have lost substantial amounts of value. Not so much the humans, because every exemplar got 83 Materium. The other exemplars, they've lost to 75% of their value in some cases. And that's not a good thing from the economy perspective. It also has dragged down the value of Materium probably more than if they had a larger distribution. And because, the main aspect of the game has been dragged down in value, it's dragged down the value of every other NFT as well. So I personally think they should have went more the spider tanks route and, turned on the floodgates so that people join in. But so that was probably the only major thing that I would say negative about the playtest was the way they did the Materium distributions.
I agree 1,000%. I think, again, if anybody from Gala's listening, my strong suggestion is build a scalable KYC system. I mean, if that's what it takes, then just build it, because I don't care. I mean, okay, I prefer not getting KYC'd, but if I have to, I will. And for players like myself, that doesn't really affect my life that much. It just felt like, it just choked it to death. And we've seen what that does to spider tanks, for an example. I mean, look at the difference before and after, and I agree 100%. Pushing the Materium emissions the other direction is absolutely critical. And that's why hashtag let the Materium flow is crucial. They got 10 billion Materium they can put out, and Their goal should be to put 7, 8 billion Materium into the world in the next 10, 15 years and let the economy fall as it will. But what about you, Grill? What's your thoughts?
I think we pretty much covered it. I agree, definitely agree about the Materium. Would have been nice to receive a little more. It was pretty disappointing, this playtest. Would have liked to have seen some more complexities from the mobs, but I know it's early and we kind of discussed that already. I'd like to see what's going to happen with the crown too. We have very little information. There's only, I think, 24, 26. I can't remember exactly how many were looted and people survived, but 24, right? Yeah, I like to see what they're going to do with the crown as well.
Well, anyways, you jump to the next section, so let's get into that. Like what we'd like to see. I think one of the most important things is the sheer number of crafting resources. I think we need like 20x, like 2,000% more plants, trees, and crafting resources. Like we need like 100+ raws, because it's really the game designer's responsibility to create gameplay that forces certain behaviors. And Alan gave a great example earlier, which is like the deeper and the wider the crafting is, the more it's going to force players to venture all over the map. For an example, like let's say there's this weird plant and it's only available in one biome and you have to travel 2 days to get to it, right? I mean, the value of that plant is going to be incredibly high. Plus, it forces gamers to explore the world deeper, forces the gamers to go into dangerous areas. And then gathering resources becomes a really hard challenge. I mean, I'd love it if it would take a week, for an example, to find the raws to just craft one thing. And I think it's going to force more commerce. And I think it's going to be much better for the economy. There's not enough resources if it's just a limited set. Everybody's going to have a bunch of everything. So, Alan, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, they need more of everything, more crafting. They need to have all the different buildings. More than anything, we need to actually be able to use our deeds, place our deeds, see how the management of the deeds work. Anything of that general nature. I very much hope that the next playtest has some deed interaction. Like this playtest here, it had, the homestead, the outpost, and the citadel. It still, lacked the vast majority of the deeds. We also need a lot more biomes. Now, the game files did have a couple of other biomes, such as the desert, which I'm looking forward to seeing, and more interactions in terms of traveling. So, being able to use your horses, being able to use your boats, all that sort of stuff, the logistics and, everything that goes along with it. So there's a lot more to come. It's going to be quite a ways away though. And seeing how much was in this playtest compared to how much is still coming, gives us kind of an idea that, we're still quite far away from launch. And at least we're seeing, substantial and very good progress. And as long as they continue doing that, I'm quite satisfied with what we're seeing here.
Grill, what was your thoughts? Do you think they should, again, just take the plants and crafting resources to the next dimension?
Oh, definitely. More plants, more types of things, rare resources, make those hard to come by. I'm with Alan. Like, I really want to see something with deeds at this point. Some of these people have had deeds for 3 years now, and I've seen no benefit to owning them besides looking pretty on OpenSea and in their wallets. I'm really hoping deeds on the ground for the next playtest, at least to some extent.
So something I definitely want to see more of in terms of combat is more defensive movements, right? And Grill, I'll cue you up on this. What's your opinion? Like, what do we need from a defensive movement perspective?
Block, parry, dodge, some kind of active mitigation, taunts, crowd controls. There's so much. There's literally nothing right now. I know they had shields originally, but those didn't make it into the playtest. Somebody who's played a tank for a long time, I would just like to see quite a bit more done. How they're going to do that in a first-person game where you can't target? Maybe with some AoE effects, maybe some kind of skill shot like an arrow, or you throw your dagger or something, or a sword, or not really sure. So, some kind of projectile-based thing. But yeah, I'd like to see a lot of different things in terms of tanking, especially since there's basically nothing at the present.
What about you, Alan? What do you want to see?
Yeah, so I agree with Grill. You need your rolls, you need your jumps, you need your dodges, your ducking, your blocking, your your spell defenses, your crowd control, whether that's rooting or invisibility or whatever. I also looking forward to taking advantage more of the halfling abilities, such as stealth and such as well. So all of those things all are contributing to defensive abilities. There's a lot to go, to say the least. This one initially had the proximity based aggro, which allowed for some tanking. When they changed that to the randomized aggro, even any kind of tanking kind of went out the window, meaning that there was really no defensive abilities like whatsoever, and that there's a ways to go, to say the least.
I want ninja rolls. Everything's about ninja rolls, man. I'm just joking, but kind of. Also, I love to be able to jump on creatures. Like, what if you could jump on top of a wolf? Looting mechanisms we covered. Grill, you mentioned this a little bit. I think having way more creature variants is crucial. I think we had a nice variety of goblins, for an example, but it would be great to have like different levels of wolves. But I think the biggest thing is we need more unpredictability, right? It was too predictable, right? You, especially knowing the stats. But I think if every animal's stats were randomized, it would dramatically boost realism. I think it would have a huge impact on immersion and in danger, because you would never really know what level of wolf you're fighting or what level of goblin you're fighting. And I think that unpredictability would dramatically change your gaming experience. So what's your thoughts on that, Grill?
That would be kind of interesting. Usually, like, mobs are pretty standardized across the MMOs that I've played in. Having them each one have their own randomized stats would be, or kind of a range of stats that they can roll when they generate, would be kind of something new and interesting. I kind of like that idea. Definitely more different types. We only had wolves, deer, goblins, and some elites and whatnot. Oh, some rabbits too. They could easily be hundreds of mobs. There could be variations of those mobs. You could have gray wolves and red wolves and brown wolves and rainbow wolves. All sorts of different stuff to make this game a success long term, which I expect them to throw in over time.
We definitely need rainbow wolves. Ellen, what's your opinion?
Yeah, some degree of randomization is good. I wouldn't want it to go from the point of having one mob that looks like another being trivial to being one shot. I do think they should potentially, other than just stats, maybe have different abilities. Like maybe one mob can like fear you versus another mob of the same type might be like vampiric and might try to heal up from it. You're attacking on you, that sort of thing. So potentially having other abilities on mobs as opposed to just different stats and stuff might be useful. And another thing is to have slight variations to their looks. So when you see a mob that looks like a certain different type of mob, that you have some idea that that particular mob is going to be different in a certain way. So you're not completely blindsided. But yeah, it would add a lot of depth and a lot of add a little bit more fear. You had to be a little bit more cautious when you're doing things, and make the game more interesting in general.
Here's an opinion that I have. I think there should be creatures that are impossible to run away from on foot, even with full stamina and no weapons equipped. Grill, would you like that feature? Like basically you'd have to fight them. Like there's no running away.
I mean, I could see in certain situations where that was almost true in the playtest, right? We could run to the Citadel, but if you were further enough out in the wild, you'd basically be forced to, you wouldn't have the stam to make it, the health to run away. So you would be forced to fight. Yeah, I could see that being interesting. It would definitely make me a little more bullish on graveyards again. That's for sure. Some elite mob that just will relentlessly attack you for the rest of forever, which is, like I said, kind of what was happening anyway. I mean, people were often just kiting things to heal tents and the Citadels or other players just to get safe again. So
it would also give more value to the horses. Ilan, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we essentially already had that, right? Every mob had an unlimited aggro radius unless the mob they were attacking died or you got out of their range. So as long as you were within their range, which with some mobs like the mega brutes and wolves and stuff was extremely long, you could never escape them. The only way you ever stopped aggro is if they pulled off you because they attacked someone else. You zoned, like such as into the Citadel. you found a safe spot / cheese spot, or you simply killed the mob. So I think we more or less already had that. It made stamina very important as a result, and it also made griefing other players one of your best defensive mechanisms, because if you were overwhelmed, a lot of the times the only way you survive is make sure someone else didn't. So
I swear I never did that once. I'm a saint.
On the same topic of creatures, I think having a wider array of creature attacks, for an example, acid spit, which would give utility to the clear bloods, or fire attacks or ice attacks, would open up a lot of utility, for an example, for potions, or maybe certain mastery classes. Like, for an example, if you're a fire master, you'd be a little more immune to fire attacks. What's your opinion on just the types of attacks? I'm assuming they're going to do that. It's not just going to be pure aggro melee type damage, Grill.
Yeah, I see them putting, all sorts of stuff in, and the corresponding resistances on gear or potions, like you said. Valheim has that, right? They have a potion for every type of element in the game, and they are pretty overpowered when you actually use them for certain types of mobs.
yeah, I definitely expect all of those things as well. Obviously, in the playtest, there was only basic non-elemental type damage, so having those kind of things in the playtest wouldn't have been really beneficial in any way. Though I think it's a must-have come actual launch.
Next is, and I think the playtest actually kind of basically it had this feature, so, but I hope they continue doing this. And that's, you want to have a wide variety of danger levels across different zones, which we had, but I think we need some unpredictability again, just like the randomized creature levels could give us that. Because let's say you're in a safe zone, let's say where the deers were, and suddenly there's this crazy creature that appears out of nowhere once in a while. I think that would just add a whole new dimension of potential danger and fear and excitement. So what's your opinion, Grill? Do you think this should tune the zones and keep them really tightly constrained, or there should be just some randomization on danger levels?
They could sneak in some maybe high levels areas within a low level zone, but make it, very clear that if you go in there, it's going to be tougher. You see that in some other games. You could have like a zone progression. I do think they want players to keep coming back to old zones over and over again. They did that in Valheim with gear, right? So you'd have to farm old materials. You had to do that a little bit in WoW back in the day, less so as they got more modernized and streamlined. But yeah, I would like to see kind of things mixed up a little bit. It would keep things a little more exciting.
Yeah, I think it would be good if they had a wide degree of mob difficulty within the zone. And I'll give you a couple of reasons. So one is they've mentioned that deed owners will get buffs, and those buffs will be limited to that specific zone. So let's say you place your deed in a certain zone and you want to take advantage of your buff, but it's all really low level mobs that are not really doing anything. You're not really going to get a whole lot of benefit from that. Also, as Grill alluded to, having to come back to zones. If every zone has a wide variety of levels, and the items that you acquire from the various mobs at those different levels are relevant at all levels, it'll force people to travel around. It'll increase trade. It'll make various access to places more relevant. It'll improve the complexity and the lucrativeness, I guess, of things such as logistics as well. So yeah, no, I would like to see there be kind of a wide range of mobs, some randomization, and remained relevance of all zones throughout the entire game.
My last point on what I'd love to see more of is puzzles, Easter eggs, mysteries, and supposedly, correct me if I'm wrong here, Ilham, but in the game files, there was a treasure, and I don't think anybody found it, right?
Yeah, so there was a loot box. Now, the only thing, so I checked all the locations for this loot box and I didn't find it, which made me come to think one of two things. Either they just didn't add this box to the game, or the actual invisible loot box of mobs when you select them to loot them was called a loot box, and as a result didn't have a location. I don't know which one that was, but it's possible that there were some Easter eggs. Like I know at one point in the Narrows Landing beach, there was like kind of a cave area, and they closed off that cave at some point. It was thought that, maybe there was some relevance there. And they also were talking in Discord about giving Mother an offering. And whether that was, people were thinking, maybe an offering of from the Wisp, whether that was the Wisp's essence, or maybe you offer something upon her altar, maybe she dies on the altar, that sort of thing as well. So were there Easter eggs in the playtest? Possibly. Clearly nobody really found any of those Easter eggs, so unless the devs specifically tell us, I guess we'll probably never know at this point.
Were we deserving more puzzles?
I would love more puzzles, more things to figure out. I think that stuff is great. I think it's one of the things that's most attractive about this game long term. That said, if they're in the playtest, it's going to be just about impossible to find them, because we're mostly just trying to survive, whether it's through the world or through other players.
Well, just based on some of the crazy examples that McCarthy has said in interviews, like during full moon at 12:01 a.m., if you're in the right place, a cave would open up for 2 minutes. Those kind of crazy examples. It's possible that these puzzles are going to be just so hard to figure out. You know what I mean? And I hope they have just a variety of puzzle difficulties, right? Some might be relatively easy, and some might be just almost impossible that it might take 5 years to figure out or something. So Elam, final thoughts? Anything else you'd like to see in the game or the next playtest? You talked about deeds. Anything else?
Just more of literally everything. More in depth, more player interaction. Obviously, we're going to need trading and stuff, and I'd like to see how the economy is actually going to work in the game itself. And I think we have a really strong base for future playtests, and I'm very much looking forward to the next playtest. Actually, something we noticed within the guild itself, upon the playtest was over, is like, what do we do? There's no playtest. Like, what's happening here? So yeah, no, more playtests in the future. I'm very much looking forward to say the least.
Yeah, everybody's dopamine levels crashed after the playtest was over. You reminded me of one of my favorite Super Bowl commercials ever. There was this couple in a jet, and the guy says, "Sky waitress, give me more of everything." Grill, what would you like to see more of?
I'd like to see more, just like you guys are saying. More mats, more complex crafting, more building types, more deeds, more creature abilities, more creature types, more. And just to touch on, you were talking about the puzzles again. Just as an example of like some of the things we've seen in World of Warcraft, there was a thing called the Time Lost Drake that would only spawn in, I think, 3 random locations for a very short amount of time. Elm could probably tell you exactly the details on that. I never farmed it, but I think he might have, and Vandalizer might have as well. Do you remember exactly what the spawn rate was, or how it spawned, or what the conditions were?
I think it was like every, was it 6 hours or 12 hours or something, and it flew in a specific pattern around the storm peaks, and you had to kill it within that period of time, or it despawned. And yeah, I tried it for a while, but I gave up on it. I don't think Van ever got the Time Lost Drake either.
I saw the body on the ground a couple of times, but that was as close as I ever got to actually killing it.
Well, that wraps up this episode. Let us know what you learned, what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you'd like to see more of in the comments. Again, join us, mastersofmaterium.com, and we'll be back soon with more awesome Mirandus content. So thanks, boys. Great episode as always.
Take care.